Hi everybody, I'm Jamie. Thank you for tuning in. I always like to recap last week's games and biggest stories, my pickups on the waiver wire, my pick'ems for this week's games, as well as some DFS plays. So let's dive in. I try to wear a New Jersey every single week if I can. I must admit that I'm running out of options now that we're in week 9, but by New Jersey this week, I mean throwback jersey. So I'm going to my Colts old school Reebok edition Austin Collie jersey. If any of you know who Austin Collie was, he was a slot receiver for the Colts, but I'm a big fan of the slot receivers, so it's right up my alley. Nonetheless, big win for the Colts. Very close win. I really thought that they would win by a bit more. Not as much offense as you would have liked to have seen with how well they've been playing. But a win's a win, and Adam Vinatieri came through big in the clutch for them at the end, I will say. But with the Broncos losing Emmanuel Sanders, they were a little bit more in it than I expected. Joe Flacco, unfortunately, has been ruled out for this week's game against the Browns, but I still think it could be an interesting game with how hot and cold the Browns have been. Another hot and cold team has been the Eagles, who blew out the Bills this week. It just depends on what team, I think, shows up for the Eagles, but to me, they've lacked a little bit of identity offensively. Zach Ertz has been not the Zach Ertz we've seen in the past, so I think they're still kind of getting things to click, but they're still in the hunt, which is a good thing, and they beat the Bills, who have been decent. But I think also their record's a little bit better than they've really been. The 49ers are absolutely rolling. I think Emmanuel Sanders slid in there very well. He had, I think, 5 targets, got in the end zone, not as much yardage as he would like, but with a quick turnaround this week, I thought that it was promising, and I think that he'll fit in very well with Jimmy Garoppolo. I think that he's the threat that they need just to kind of balance things out. And Tevin Coleman, I just think he keeps looking better and better as things go on. And with Breida out, I think that they'll lean a little bit more on him. But he hasn't been ruled out for this next week at this point, as far as I know. Another big week from Aaron Jones and a must-win for the against the Chiefs. And in that game, Matt Moore looked pretty decent, and I thought played well enough to keep him in the game, just not enough to get it done. So the Packers actually look very good. That division is another one that's going to be a fight to the finish. So that should be an interesting one to kind of keep tabs on. One thing I was excited to see, Mike Evans back in fantasy relevance. So Mike Evans owners got to be happy. Devontae Freeman seemed to benefit pretty well. He had 8 targets, I believe, and I think he caught all 8 of them. But he had some good targets, some good yardage receiving-wise, and was involved, so that's a good thing. And I think with Matt Ryan kind of being on the fritz, we'll see how things go. But Matt Schaub had over 400 yards passing, and that's still not enough to win the game. I guess that's what happens when you play Russell Wilson. But anyway, Russell Gage is another one to keep an eye on. He had 7 out of 9 targets for 58 yards. So the Falcons have historically had this 3-headed monster, so maybe they're going to continue to go back to that. But Calvin Ridley looked good. Julio Jones had a killer week, so he's back to his old self. So hopefully that continues. So let's get to some pickups on the waiver wire. At the wide receiver position, 10% owned Danny Amendola. I looked through, and there's a lot of people that people are targeting. I do like Danny Amendola. He took an 8 for 8, and I've been targeting him all year, really, just because I think he's had some good upside, and he's, outside of 2 games, he's been very consistent. So if you need somebody that's a plug-and-play kind of guy, I think Danny Amendola is a good option. He's had 19 targets the last 2 weeks. I also like Cole Beasley. He caught 3 of 7, 41 yards and a touchdown. He's been very decent. He's almost had 10 points just about every week. He's been consistent. He's 24% owned. Now, 50% owned is Jamison Crowder. I think he's a long shot at this point. He has not had a great trajectory the last few weeks, but he's got some good upside. Another one that people are targeting is, of course, Demaryius Thomas. So I think it's going to be interesting just to kind of see now that DT's in there and Sam Darnold's back in the offense, who really gets the target share. Demaryius Thomas has had 9 targets over the last 2 weeks. He had 9 targets and then 5 targets last week. Last week he had 63 yards. So, I mean, he's been very involved, and he's 7% owned. DT seems to be the safer option here. But Jamison Crowder, in the first week, he had over 10 targets. I think he had 19 targets or something with Sam Darnold in there. So Jamison Crowder is historically, he's always been a very low volume guy for big production. Like when he scores, or when he gets a catch, it's for like 30 yards. So with that capability, if he's getting volume, he's going to be very effective, I think. So, take it as you will, but I think there's some decent options there at the running back position. I just don't think that there's that much, to be honest. Jalen Samuels, especially if you're a James Conner owner, but I think he's going to be playing this week. It seems like, he's a fighter. It seems like he's not been ruled out at this point. At the running back position, I still like Mark Walton for the Dolphins, but there's really just not much to bite at that I'm interested in, to be honest. The only thing that is a consideration is potentially Chris Thompson coming off of injury. He has good rapport with Case Keenum, with them kind of sticking with him now throughout this. I think that could be a good option for a plug-and-play kind of thing. But to me, there's not really anybody that I've seen on the waiver wire that I really, really like long-term. At the tight end position, actually, there's some decent options. I think Chris Herndon, if you need somebody long-term, is a very, very viable option. Sam Darnold really locked into the tight end position, and I think with Chris Herndon being a more talented tight end, I think he is a very alluring option. If you need somebody to start this week, it might not be him. But if you need somebody long-term, I think he's good. I also like Darren Fells, if he's still available. And it was also nice to see Tyler Eifert back to fantasy relevance. What I would say is Andy Dalton's been ruled out as the starting quarterback this week, so they're benching him. So that diminishes his value, I do believe. But nice to see him relevant again, but we'll see how he fits in. If you need somebody, he could be something down the line. My pick'ems for this week, I'm going with the Niners at Arizona. I'm going with the Jags at home against Texans, who are not the favored party here. I'm taking the Bills at home against the Redskins. I'm taking the Vikings at the Chiefs. Hopefully they don't cheat. I'm taking the Vikings at Kansas City, which is not what they've got, but that's fine with me. I like to go against the grain. I got the Jets against the Dolphins, who are at home. I've also got the Eagles at home against the Bears. I've got the Colts against the Steelers. I think that's a no-brainer. I've got the Panthers at home against the Titans, although I think the Titans could give them a very good game, especially with how well Ryan Tannehill's been playing. I've got the Lions beating the Raiders, although that's not what the critics say. And I've got the Seahawks, of course, at home against the Bucks. I've got the Broncos beating the Browns, which is, they seem to think the Browns are going to beat them. But I just think the Browns have been inconsistent. I think the Broncos could pull one off. We'll see. I've got the Packers beating the Chargers, who are at home. I've got the Pats definitely beating the Ravens, although they're at home. But that one could be an interesting one. I'll be tuned into that one. And then the Cowboys, I've got them beating the Giants, who are at home. So let's get into some DFS plays. I've got Russell Wilson and Tyler Lockett. They're a little bit expensive. Russell Wilson's 7,100 and Tyler Lockett's 7,500. But I do like their matchup in this game against the Bucks. Everybody's been lighting up the Bucks, so I think that'll be a good one. And Tyler Lockett's been very consistent this year. I've liked him. Derek Carr, I've got him. He's a little bit of a cheaper option paired up with Tyrell Williams, who looked decent in his first game back from injury. I like Ryan Tannehill. The question is, who do you pair him up with? So Corey Davis seems to be getting the most target share, and he's 4,600, but it's a little bit of a crapshoot. I'm not going to lie. Running back-wise, I like Josh Jacobs at 6,500. I also like Phillip Lindsay. I think they're going to rely heavily upon him in the run. I like Aaron Jones again. I think Devontae Adams might play this week. Turns out I'm not besties with Adam Schefter, but I just got a feeling that Devontae Adams might play this week. It's been a couple weeks, so I don't know, but I still like him. I think he's due for a 100-yard game. He hasn't had one in a few, and nonetheless, he's still been effective. I think at the lower tier option for wide receivers, I like Danny Amendola. He's only 4,700. I like Corey Davis at 4,600, as I said. I like Jarvis Landry at 4,500. He's been very consistent target-wise, and he's been very decently consistent in terms of production, and he's very cheap. So I like him. Tight end-wise, I like Zach Ertz because he's very valuable, or very, very cost-effective at this point. He's 4,700, and I obviously like Darren Waller for Oakland, but you're going to pay for him. I think for what Zach Ertz is going for right now, he's a bargain. I also like Jimmy Graham at 4,300. Defensively, I like the Steelers, who've been sneakily very, very consistent. So I also like them in terms of a pickup on the waiver wire. They've had almost 10 points every week, except for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but they've been in the positive column defensively. I also like the Broncos at 2,900. And I don't know that I touched on my defensive plays. I like Philly versus Chicago this week. And I also like Dallas at New York. In terms of quarterbacks, and I said Pittsburgh too. So Pittsburgh is a decent option. They do go up against the Colts this week, which maybe this isn't the week to play them, but it could be a decent shot in terms of DFS, and down the line they've been very efficient. Quarterback wise, I like Ryan Tannehill and Sam Darnold. Ryan Tannehill has been very good, 28% owned, and Sam Darnold's 23% owned. If Jimmy Garoppolo is available, he's an interesting play too in your league, but he's a little bit more owned in terms of, I think he's 50% owned. But anyway, that's all I got this week. Good luck. Hope all of your fantasy leagues are fantastic so far. Follow me on Twitter at fantasy_more. Feel free to comment below, tweet at me. Anybody you got, sit 'em, start 'em, let's do it. Happy to assist. Have a great week.